Behind the golden gates of Kensington Palace, where secrets are buried deeper than ancient royal tombs, a single manila envelope was about to shatter the carefully constructed world of Prince William. What the palace guards discovered that gray morning in October would not only challenge everything the future king believed about his family, but would also reveal a truth so devastating that it would send the normally composed prince into a rage that palace staff had never witnessed before.
The evidence they found wasn't just scandalous. It was the kind of revelation that could topple dynasties and rewrite history books. As William's trembling hands held the photographs and documents that had been hidden for decades, his security team watched in stunned silence as their future monarch transformed from a dignified royal into a man consumed by fury, betrayal, and a thirst for justice that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy.
This is the story of how one discovery changed everything, and how a prince's quest for truth would lead him down a path that threatened to destroy not just his family's reputation but the institution itself. The morning mist hung heavy over Kensington Palace as Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews made her way through the ornate corridors, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. She had been summoned by the head of palace security, Commander James Harrison, for what he described as a matter of utmost urgency. The gravity in his voice during their brief phone call had sent chills down her spine. Prince William was scheduled to return from his charity visit to Scotland later that afternoon, and whatever Harrison had discovered needed to be addressed before his arrival. The palace had always been a place where secrets were carefully guarded, but Matthews could sense that something extraordinary had shaken the very core of the royal household. Commander Harrison met her in his private office, his usually composed demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured towards a leather briefcase sitting on his mahogany desk. "Detective Inspector," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to show you must remain absolutely confidential until we determine the best course of action." Matthews nodded, her professional instincts already heightened by the commander's obvious distress. She had worked closely with the palace security team for over 5 years, handling various sensitive matters, but she had never seen Harrison in such a state. The man who typically exuded confidence and control now appeared genuinely frightened by whatever lay within that briefcase. Yesterday evening, during a routine security sweep of the private quarters, one of our guards discovered a hidden compartment behind a false wall in the late Princess Diana's former study, Harrison continued, his voice growing more strained with each word. The room had been sealed since her death, used only for storage. We were conducting maintenance when the wall gave way, revealing a space that none of us knew existed. The commander opened the briefcase with shaking hands, revealing a collection of photographs, handwritten letters, and official documents that appeared decades old. The papers were yellowed with age, but their contents were still clearly legible. Matthews leaned forward, her trained eye immediately recognizing the significance of what lay before her. The photographs showed a young Princess Diana in intimate conversations with several men who were definitely not Prince Charles. The images captured private moments that spoke of deep emotional connections, secret meetings, and relationships that went far beyond mere friendship. But it was the documents that truly shocked Matthews to her core. Among the papers were birth certificates, medical records, and DNA test results that painted a picture so scandalous it could rewrite royal history. The documents suggested that Prince Harry was not Prince Charles's biological son, but rather the child of one of Diana's secret relationships. More damaging still were letters in Diana's own handwriting, detailing her fears about the royal family's reaction if the truth were ever discovered. "My God," Matthews whispered, her professional composure momentarily shattered. "Are these documents authentic?" Harrison nodded grimly. "We've had them preliminarily examined by our forensics team. The paper, ink, and handwriting all appear consistent with the time period. The DNA results are dated just months before Diana's death. It appears she was conducting her own investigation, perhaps planning to reveal the truth." The implications were staggering. If these documents were genuine, they revealed not only Diana's secret affairs, but also suggested that the royal family might have been aware of questions surrounding Harry's parentage for years. The letters indicated Diana's growing paranoia about palace surveillance and her fear that her secrets would be used against her. Matthews studied one particular letter more closely. In Diana's distinctive handwriting, she had written about feeling trapped and watched constantly. She described meetings with private investigators and her desperate attempts to gather evidence that would protect both herself and her children if the royal family ever tried to use her secrets as weapons. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, more like a journal entry, but it revealed the depth of Diana's fear and isolation in her final months. "There's more," Harrison said quietly, producing another set of documents. These were modern papers, official correspondence between various palace officials, and private security firms. The dates showed these communications had occurred over the past several years, long after Diana's death. They detailed efforts to locate and retrieve any remaining evidence of Diana's private investigations. The recent documents revealed an ongoing conspiracy to suppress the truth about Diana's findings. High-ranking palace officials had apparently been searching for these hidden materials for decades, and their discovery now threatened to expose not only the original scandal but also years of subsequent cover-up efforts. Matthews realized she was looking at evidence of potential fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice that reached the highest levels of the British establishment. The implications for Prince William, who had spent his entire adult life defending his mother's memory and building his own reputation on principles of honesty and transparency, would be devastating. "What about Prince Harry?" Matthews asked, though she already suspected the answer would complicate matters even further. "These documents suggest he has no knowledge of any of this," Harrison replied. "But there are indications that certain family members and palace officials may have suspected the truth for years. If Prince William learns about this and discovers that people around him knew and kept it secret, his reaction could be explosive." The commander walked to the window, staring out at the palace gardens where Diana had once played with her young sons. Prince William has always been protective of his mother's legacy and fiercely loyal to his family. Learning that there may have been systematic deception about something this fundamental could destroy his trust in everyone around him. Matthews understood the gravity of the situation. Prince William was not just a member of the royal family, he was the future King of England. His emotional stability and trust in his advisors were crucial to the stability of the monarchy itself. The revelation of this scandal, particularly if it included evidence of ongoing deception by palace officials, could provoke a reaction that would be impossible to contain. "We need to consider how to present this information to him," Matthews suggested, though she knew there was no gentle way to deliver such devastating news. Harrison shook his head. "That's just it, Detective Inspector. We may not have a choice in the timing." Prince William requested to personally review any unusual findings from the security sweep. He specifically mentioned wanting to go through items from his mother's study himself. "He'll be here within the hour." The weight of the situation settled heavily on both of them. They were about to witness a future king discover that his entire understanding of his family history might be built on lies and cover-ups. The man who had spent years publicly defending his mother's memory and working to preserve her legacy was about to learn that she had harbored secrets that could shake the monarchy to its foundations. As they heard the sound of vehicles approaching in the courtyard below, Harrison closed the briefcase with a decisive snap. "Prince William is arriving," he announced, his voice filled with dread. "God help us all when he sees what we've found." Matthews could only imagine the fury that would follow. Prince William's devotion to his mother's memory was legendary, as was his commitment to truth and transparency in royal affairs. The combination of personal betrayal and institutional deception contained in those documents was about to collide with a man who had the power to tear down the very system he was born to lead. The sound of footsteps approaching the office announced that their time for preparation had run out. In moments, Prince William would walk through that door expecting a routine briefing about palace maintenance, only to discover evidence that would challenge everything he believed about his family, his heritage, and the institution he was destined to inherit. Prince William entered Commander Harrison's office with the confident stride of a man accustomed to authority, but his expression quickly shifted from casual interest to deep concern as he noticed the tension radiating from both Harrison and Detective Inspector Matthews. The briefcase on the desk seemed to draw his attention immediately, as if he could sense its significance without knowing its contents. "Commander," William began, his voice carrying the measured tone he had perfected through years of public service, "I understand you've made some discoveries during the security sweep. I'd like to review anything connected to my mother's belongings personally." Harrison exchanged a meaningful glance with Matthews before responding. "Your Royal Highness, what we've found is quite extraordinary. I must warn you that the contents of this briefcase may be deeply disturbing and could have significant implications for the royal family." William's jaw tightened slightly, the only outward sign of his growing apprehension. "Commander, I've dealt with difficult revelations about my family before. Whatever you've discovered, I need to know the truth. My mother deserves nothing less than complete transparency about her life and her legacy." With visible reluctance, Harrison opened the briefcase once again. William moved closer to the desk, his eyes immediately drawn to the aged photographs and documents. As he began to examine the materials, Matthews watched his facial expressions change from curiosity to confusion, then from shock to something approaching rage. The first photographs William picked up showed his mother in intimate conversation with a man he didn't recognize, their body language suggesting a relationship that went far beyond friendship. The timestamp on the photograph indicated it was taken during his parents' marriage, when he and Harry were still young children. "Who is this man?" William asked, his voice beginning to carry an edge that made both Harrison and Matthews uncomfortable. According to the documentation, his name was James Whitmore, a former cavalry officer who worked as a private security consultant. Harrison replied carefully. The letters suggest he and your mother maintained a close relationship for several years. William's hands trembled slightly as he picked up more photographs, each one revealing new evidence of his mother's secret relationships. But it was when he reached the DNA test results that his carefully maintained composure finally began to crack. The document was clear and unambiguous. It showed that Prince Harry shared no biological connection with Prince Charles, but did show a genetic match with James Whitmore. The test was dated just 3 months before Diana's death, and attached to it was a handwritten note from Diana herself, expressing her fears about what this revelation might mean for her son's futures. This can't be real, William whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. The evidence before him was too comprehensive, too detailed to be fabricated. Harry is my father's son.
He's my brother. Matthews watched as the full implications of the discovery began to dawn on the future king. This wasn't just about his mother having affairs during her troubled marriage. This was about the fundamental question of royal succession and legitimacy.
If Harry was not Charles's biological son, it meant that William's understanding of his family, his brother's place in the line of succession, and even his mother's final years were all based on carefully constructed lies. There's more, Your Royal Highness, Harrison said reluctantly, producing the letters Diana had written to herself. These appear to be your mother's private thoughts about the situation. She was clearly struggling with how to handle this information. William read the letters with growing anguish. Diana's words revealed not just her guilt about her extramarital relationships, but her terror about how the royal establishment would react if the truth became known. She wrote about feeling constantly watched and questioned whether her death would be the only way to keep the secret safe. One letter was particularly heartbreaking. Diana had written about watching Harry play, knowing that he was innocent of the circumstances of his birth, and fearing that the truth would destroy his life. She expressed agonizing guilt about potentially putting both her sons in impossible positions, forced to choose between family loyalty and royal duty. She was scared, William said, his voice barely audible. She was terrified of what would happen if anyone discovered this, and she was right to be afraid. But as William continued reading, his grief began to transform into rage. The modern documents Harrison had shown Matthews revealed that palace officials had suspected the truth for years. There were memos discussing the need to monitor Harry carefully for any signs that he might suspect his parentage, and strategies for discrediting any potential genetic evidence that might surface. You knew, William said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. His eyes were fixed on Harrison with an intensity that made the commander step backward involuntarily. Not you specifically, perhaps, but the palace knew. Someone has known about this for years, maybe decades. Harrison tried to explain that he had only learned of the document's existence the day before, but William wasn't listening. His attention had turned to a particular memo dated just 2 years earlier, discussing concerns about Prince Harry's public statements regarding his desire to distance himself from royal traditions. The memo suggested that Harry's rebellious attitudes might be rooted in subconscious awareness of his true parentage. They've been watching him, William continued, his voice rising with each word. They've been analyzing his behavior, treating him like a potential threat to the monarchy, all while knowing the truth about who he really is. And nobody told me. Nobody thought the future king should know that his brother isn't actually his brother. Matthews had witnessed many emotional breakdowns in her career, but watching a future monarch grapple with the collapse of his fundamental beliefs about family and duty was unlike anything she had ever experienced. William's anger was building systematically, feeding on each new piece of evidence, each revelation of institutional deception. Where are the people who authorized these surveillance operations? William demanded, picking up one of the more recent memos. I want to speak with everyone who knew about this and decided to keep it secret. I want to know exactly who made the decision that I wasn't trustworthy enough to know the truth about my own family. Harrison tried to calm the prince, explaining that many of the officials mentioned in the documents were no longer with the palace, but William was beyond reasoning. His entire worldview was crashing down around him, and his famous sense of duty and loyalty was transforming into a weapon turned against the very institution he was meant to lead. My mother died carrying the secret, William said, his voice now carrying a dangerous quiet that was somehow more frightening than his earlier rage. She lived her final years in terror, believing that the truth would destroy her children's lives. And meanwhile, palace officials were playing political games with information that belonged to our family. The prince stood abruptly, sweeping the documents back into the briefcase with decisive movements. I want every person mentioned in these memos brought in for questioning. I want a complete review of all palace security protocols regarding my family's privacy. And I want to know exactly how far up this conspiracy goes. Matthews recognized the look in William's eyes. It was the expression of someone who had discovered that everything they believed about justice and truth was a carefully constructed illusion. The man who had spent his adult life advocating for transparency in public service had just learned that the people closest to him had been practicing systemic deception. Your Royal Highness, Harrison ventured carefully, we need to consider the implications for Prince Harry. If this information becomes public, Harry has a right to know who his father is. William interrupted, his voice filled with cold determination. And I have a right to know who's been lying to me about it. The question isn't whether this information should be revealed. The question is how many people are going to pay for keeping it secret. The transformation was complete. The composed, dutiful prince who had entered the office had been replaced by a man driven by fury and a thirst for accountability that threatened to consume everything in its path. Matthews realized they were witnessing the birth of a royal vendetta that would reshape the British monarchy forever. The next 72 hours transformed Kensington Palace from a symbol of British stability into the epicenter of a royal earthquake that would reshape the monarchy forever. Prince William's initial fury had crystallized into a methodical campaign for justice that sent shockwaves through every level of the royal establishment. William's first action was to demand immediate audiences with every senior palace official mentioned in the documents. His private secretary, Sir Thomas Hendricks, found himself facing a future king whose trust had been completely shattered. The man who had advised William for over 8 years suddenly faced accusations of conspiracy and deception that threatened to destroy his career and reputation.
Sir Thomas, William began, his voice carrying an icy formality that made the room feel several degrees colder. According to these documents, you were personally informed about questions regarding my brother's parentage 3 years ago.
You were specifically asked to monitor his public statements for any indication that he might suspect the truth. You never thought to share this information with me. Sir Thomas attempted to explain that his actions had been guided by protocols designed to protect the royal family, but William was no longer interested in institutional justifications. The man who had once valued loyalty above all else now saw those same loyalties as weapons used against him. Protection, William repeated, the word carrying bitter irony. You protected everyone except the people who actually deserved the truth. You protected a system built on lies while allowing my mother to die believing she was alone with a terrible secret. The confrontation lasted for hours, during which William systematically dismantled every defense Sir Thomas offered. By the end of their meeting, one of the most senior advisors in the royal household had tendered his resignation, the first casualty in what would become a comprehensive purge of palace staff. But William's anger wasn't limited to palace officials. His attention turned to his father, Prince Charles, with questions that cut to the heart of their relationship and the future of the monarchy. The meeting between father and son took place in Charles's private study at Clarence House, away from the prying eyes of staff and security cameras. Did you know? William asked without preamble, placing the DNA test results on his father's antique writing desk. Did you know that Harry wasn't your biological son? And did you allow palace officials to treat this information like a state secret? Charles's reaction revealed the complexity of a situation that had haunted him for decades. His silence spoke louder than any denial could have. The future king watched his father struggle with truths that had shaped their family's private dynamics for years, realizing that even his closest relationships had been built on carefully managed deceptions. Your mother was frightened, Charles finally said, his voice carrying the weight of 25 years of buried guilt. She came to me with the test results shortly before her death. She was terrified about what it would mean for Harry, for the monarchy, for all of us. We agreed that the information should remain private, at least until we could determine how to protect everyone involved. But William was beyond accepting protective motivations as justification for deception. You made that decision without consulting me, despite the fact that I would someday be responsible for leading this family and this institution.
You allowed me to spend years making public statements about family unity and transparency while knowing that our own family was built on fundamental lies.
The revelation that his father had been complicit in the cover-up added another layer to William's sense of betrayal. The man he had looked up to as an example of royal duty had participated in exactly the kind of institutional deception that William had publicly opposed throughout his adult life. Meanwhile, the question of how to handle Prince Harry loomed over every decision. William knew that his brother deserved to learn the truth about his parentage, but he also understood that Harry's reaction could be even more explosive than his own. Harry had always struggled with his place in the royal family, and learning that he was not biologically part of it could trigger a crisis that would reverberate around the world. William chose to approach his brother directly, arranging a private meeting at Frogmore House, away from the palace infrastructure that had become synonymous with deception and surveillance.
The conversation between the two brothers would later be described by those who knew them as the most difficult moment in their relationship. "Harry," William began, struggling to find words for a revelation that would change his brother's life forever. "I've discovered some information about our family that you need to know."
"About your biological father." Harry's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger that matched William's own fury. But Harry's rage was directed not just at the palace officials who had kept the secret, but at the entire system that had defined his identity through careful deception. "My whole life has been a lie," Harry said, his voice filled with a pain that went beyond mere anger.
"Every time someone questioned my place in the family, every time the media speculated about my parentage, there were people who knew the truth and chose to let me suffer through the uncertainty." The brothers spent hours working through the implications of the revelation.
Harry's reaction included not just emotional devastation, but practical questions about his role in the royal family, his place in the line of succession, and his relationship with Prince Charles, who had raised him as a son despite knowing the biological truth. But it was Harry who first raised the question that would define the final phase of William's campaign for justice: what to do about the cover-up itself.
The systematic deception, the surveillance operations, and the institutional conspiracy represented violations of trust that went beyond personal family matters. "They turned us into pawns," Harry said, his anger now focused on the palace officials who had orchestrated years of careful manipulation.
"They managed our public statements, our relationships, our entire lives based on information they kept secret from us. That's not protection. That's control." William realized that his brother was right. The issue wasn't just about family secrets. It was about the fundamental question of whether royal family members could trust their own advisors and institutions. The palace staff had demonstrated their willingness to prioritize institutional stability over personal honesty, even when dealing with the future monarch. William's response was swift and comprehensive. He demanded the resignation of every official who had participated in the cover-up, regardless of their seniority or years of service. He insisted on a complete review of palace security protocols, with particular attention to any operations that involve surveillance or information management regarding royal family members. But perhaps most significantly, William made it clear that the royal family's relationship with the British media and public would fundamentally change. The careful management of public perception that had characterized the monarchy for decades would be replaced by a commitment to transparency that might be uncomfortable but would be honest. "If we're going to lead this institution into the future," William announced to his senior staff in what would become known as the Transparency Declaration, "we're going to do it without the lies and manipulation that have defined palace operations for too long. The public deserves leaders they can trust, and that means leaders who tell the truth, even when the truth is difficult." The revelation about Prince Harry's parentage never became fully public, but the changes William implemented in its aftermath transformed the British monarchy.
Palace operations became more transparent, royal family members gained greater control over their personal information, and the culture of institutional deception that had enabled the cover-up was systematically dismantled. Detective Inspector Matthews, who had witnessed the beginning of the crisis, later reflected that Prince William's fury had ultimately served the monarchy well. His refusal to accept comfortable lies in place of difficult truths had forced an institution to confront its own capacity for deception and to choose a different path forward. The man who had lost control when confronted with evidence of systematic betrayal had ultimately found the strength to transform that fury into the foundation for a more honest and accountable royal family. The prince, who had discovered his entire understanding of his family was built on lies, had chosen to ensure that future generations would inherit an institution committed to truth, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might be. In the end, William's rage had burned away decades of careful deception, leaving behind a monarchy that was perhaps less perfectly managed, but infinitely more authentic. The guards who had discovered the hidden evidence had unknowingly triggered a transformation that would define the British royal family for generations to come.